Please, let me help you. Take my hand.
When a compassionate billionaire discovers his office cleaner and her young daughter sleeping in the company lobby, he offers them shelter and falls in love. But their budding romance is threatened by his sister's bitter vendetta against the woman she claims betrayed her years ago. The sharp, buzzing sound of the phone alarm cut through the quiet of the corridor. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she forgot where she was. The ceiling was too high, the air too cool. Then she remembered. This was not her room. This was the hallway of the office building where she worked. She and her daughter Grace were sleeping on a thin mat on the cold, hard floor. Sarah pushed herself up, her back aching from the unforgiving tiles. She looked down at Grace, who was still asleep. Her small body was curled into a ball, wrapped in the colorful Ankara fabric they used as a blanket. Grace's face was peaceful, but Sarah knew their life was anything but. "Grace, wake up, my love," Sarah whispered, gently shaking her daughter's shoulder. "It's time to get ready for school." Grace mumbled and turned over, pulling the fabric tighter around her. "Just a little more, Mommy." Sarah's heart ached. She wished she could let her daughter sleep. She wished they were in a warm bed in a proper home, where the morning sun would wake them instead of a loud phone alarm. But they had no home. Not anymore. They had been sleeping in this corridor for a week, ever since their landlord had thrown them out. Sarah had been late with the rent, and he had run out of patience. All their belongings were in a few bags tucked into a corner, hidden behind a large potted plant. "We have to hurry, sweetie," Sarah said, her voice a little firmer this time. "You don't want to be late for school, do you?" Grace finally sat up, rubbing her eyes. She looked around the long, empty hallway. The only light came from the emergency lights on the ceiling, casting long shadows on the walls. "Is it morning already?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes, it is," Sarah said, trying to sound cheerful. "Let's go wash up." She led Grace to the small public restroom at the end of the hall. It was the only place they could wash. Sarah splashed cold water on her own face, trying to wash away the tiredness. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were puffy, and there were dark circles under them. She looked older than her 28 years. She helped Grace change into her clean school uniform, a blue and white checkered dress. Sarah had washed it in this same sink the night before, and it was still a little damp. Grace didn't complain. She was a good girl, too good for this life. While Grace ate the small piece of bread Sarah had saved from the day before, Sarah changed into her own work clothes, a simple blue cleaner's uniform. She packed Grace's school bag, making sure her books were neat. She wished she had a snack to put in the bag, but there was nothing left. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, forcing a smile. Grace nodded, her eyes looking a little sad. "Mommy, when can we go back to our house?" Sarah's smile faltered. She knelt and hugged her daughter tightly. "Soon, my love, I promise. Mommy is working very hard to find us a new place, a better place." She didn't know if it was a promise she could keep, but she had to believe it. For Grace's sake, she had to. They packed up their mat and blanket, hiding them behind the plant again. Sarah took Grace's hand, and they walked out of the building into the early morning light of Lagos. The city was already coming to life. Danfo buses honked their horns, and street vendors were setting up their stalls. Sarah dropped Grace off at the school gate, giving her another hug. "Have a good day, my angel. Learn a lot." "I will, Mommy," Grace said, and ran inside to join her friends. Sarah watched her go, her heart a mix of love and fear. She turned and started the long walk back to the office building. It was time for her to start her day as a cleaner, in the same building where she and her daughter slept on the cold, hard floor. She sighed, looking at her uniform. She had to keep going. She had to endure it for Grace. Sarah pushed the cleaning cart down the long, polished hallway of the investment firm. The wheels made a soft rumbling sound on the marble floor. Her job was to make this place shine, to erase any sign of dust or dirt. It was her job to be invisible, a silent worker who kept the background perfect for the important people who worked here. She started with the main reception area, wiping down the glass tables and dusting the expensive leather chairs. She worked quickly and quietly, her mind focused on the tasks. It was better to focus on work than to think about her own problems. Thinking only made the ache in her heart worse. Just as she was finishing the reception area, a sharp voice called her name. "Sarah!" She turned to see Mr. Adebayo, one of the senior managers, standing at the door of his office. He was a stern-looking man with a permanent frown. He looked at her with disapproval. "Why is my office not clean yet?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet office. "I have told you many times to start with my office. I have an important meeting this morning." "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said, her voice low. "I was just about to come to your office." "About to? You should have been done by now," he snapped. "Do you think we pay you to wander around? Get to it now." Sarah nodded, her cheeks burning with shame. She quickly pushed her cart toward his office, avoiding his angry gaze. Mr. Adebayo was always like this. He made her feel small and worthless, like a piece of dirt he wanted wiped away. She entered his office and began to clean, her hands moving automatically. She emptied his trash can, dusted his large wooden desk, and vacuumed the floor. She tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but she could feel his impatient eyes on her. When she was done, she left without a word and moved on to the next office. It belonged to David, the other director of the company. He was the opposite of Mr. Adebayo. He was kind and always had a smile for her. As she entered his office, he looked up from his computer. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her voice still a little shaky from her encounter with Mr. Adebayo. David's smile faded as he looked at her more closely. "Are you all right? You look tired." Sarah quickly looked down at the floor. She didn't want him to see the exhaustion in her eyes. She didn't want his pity. "I'm fine, sir, just a little tired." He didn't push, but his concerned look was a small act of kindness that made her feel a little better. He was a good man. He treated her like a person, not just a cleaner. She cleaned his office with extra care, making sure everything was perfect. When she was finished, she gave him a small smile and left. The contrast between her two bosses was sharp. Mr. Adebayo made her feel like she was nothing, while David made her feel seen, even for a moment. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of cleaning and scrubbing. She cleaned bathrooms, wiped windows, and polished floors. She worked hard, trying to keep her mind busy, but every now and then her thoughts would drift back to Grace. She worried about her daughter. Was she happy at school? Was she hungry? At noon, the office started to buzz with the sounds of lunchtime. People laughed and talked as they headed out to get food. David's personal assistant walked past Sarah, holding a menu from an expensive restaurant. She was ordering lunch for David. Sarah's stomach rumbled loudly. She put a hand on it, as if to quiet it down. She had no money for lunch. The small amount of cash she had was for Grace. She would have to make do with water until she could share the food David had given her with her daughter. The thought of that food was the only thing that kept her going. It was a secret treasure waiting for her at the end of a long, hard day. The lunch hour was the hardest part of Sarah's day. The smell of delicious food from nearby restaurants filled the air. Her colleagues gathered in the break room, their laughter echoing as they ate their meals. Sarah usually found a quiet corner to sit by herself, pretending to be busy on her phone. Today, her hunger was a sharp pain in her stomach. The small piece of bread she had eaten for breakfast was long gone. All she had was a bottle of water. She told herself it was enough. The money she had was for Grace's school fees and their next meal, whatever that might be. She couldn't afford to spend it on herself. She sat on a stool in a deserted hallway, taking small sips of water. She tried to think of other things, Grace's bright smile, the story she would read to her tonight. But her stomach wouldn't let her forget. Sarah. She looked up. David was standing in front of her, a kind expression on his face. She quickly stood up, feeling embarrassed that he had found her hiding like this. "Sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "could you come to my office for a moment?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. Had she done something wrong? Was Mr. Adebayo complaining about her again? She followed David back to his office, her mind racing with worry. He closed the door behind them and pointed to his desk. On it was a large takeout container, still warm, and a bag with fresh juice. The aroma of jollof rice and chicken filled the room, making Sarah's mouth water. "My sister Mary packed this for me this morning," David explained. "She always packs too much food. I can't possibly eat all of this. I was wondering if you would like to have it." Sarah stared at the food, then back at David. She was speechless. He was offering her his lunch. It wasn't pity in his eyes, but genuine kindness. He was trying to help her without making her feel like a charity case. "Sir, I can't," she stammered, even though every part of her wanted to say yes. "Please," David said, his voice soft. "It would be a waste otherwise. And I know you work so hard. You need a good meal to keep your energy up." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She tried to blink them away, but one escaped and rolled down her cheek. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such simple, selfless kindness. It was more than just food. It was a moment of grace, a moment where she felt like a person again, not just a struggling single mother. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." "You're welcome, Sarah," he said with a warm smile. "And please, call me David." She took the container of food, her hands trembling. It was still warm. She thought of Grace. Tonight her daughter would have a proper delicious dinner. They would eat together, and for a little while they could pretend that everything was okay. She walked out of his office, clutching the food like it was the most precious thing in the world. Back in her quiet corner, she opened the container. The rice was bright orange, the chicken was perfectly grilled, and there was a side of fried plantain. It was a feast. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. With each spoonful, she felt her strength returning. It wasn't just the food that filled her, it was the hope that came with it. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change for the better. The thought of David's smile stayed with her for the rest of the day, a small light in the darkness of her life. The school bell rang, and a flood of children in colorful uniforms poured out of the gates. Sarah stood waiting, a small smile on her face. Seeing Grace at the end of the day was the best part of her world. She scanned the crowd, looking for her daughter's familiar braided hair. Finally, she saw her. But Grace wasn't running and laughing with her friends like usual. She was walking slowly, her head down, her school bag slung over her shoulder. Her face was clouded with sadness. Sarah's smile vanished. She rushed to her daughter and knelt. "Grace, my love, what's wrong?" Grace looked up, her big brown eyes filled with tears. "The other kids made fun of me today," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Made fun of you?" "Why?" Sarah asked, her heart sinking. "They were talking about their houses," Grace explained, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "Janet said she has a big room with lots of toys. Tunde said his father is building a swimming pool. They asked me when they could come to our house to play." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain to her 7-year-old daughter that they didn't have a house, that their home was a cold corridor in an office building? "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked softly. "I didn't say anything," Grace mumbled, "and then they laughed at me. They said I probably live in a hut." Sarah pulled Grace into a tight hug, her own eyes stinging with tears. Her daughter's pain was a knife in her heart. It was one thing for her to suffer, but it was unbearable to see Grace hurt like this. She had to protect her. "Listen to me, my angel," Sarah said, pulling back to look into Grace's eyes. "You don't have to be sad. We have a house. It's our old house, and we're just staying somewhere else for a little while. If they ask again, you tell them you live on 3rd Avenue in Lekki. You tell them our house is big and beautiful, and we will go back there soon." It was a lie, of course. 3rd Avenue was where they used to live, in a small apartment they could no longer afford. But Sarah had to say something to save her daughter from more embarrassment. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth, but it was a shield to protect Grace's fragile heart. Grace looked at her, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Really, Mommy? Can I tell them that?" "Yes, my love." "You can," Sarah said, stroking her daughter's hair. The sadness on Grace's face lifted a little. She took Sarah's hand and they started walking. But Sarah's heart was heavy. The weight of their situation felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just about finding a roof over their heads anymore. It was about giving her daughter a life where she didn't have to be ashamed. A life where she could be a happy, carefree child. As they approached the office building, the place that was their secret, temporary shelter, Sarah looked at the tall glass doors with a sense of dread. The lie she had told Grace was a temporary fix, a small bandage on a deep wound. How much longer could they live like this? How much longer could she protect her? daughter from the harsh reality of their lives. The questions echoed in her mind, with no easy answers in sight. The need for a real home, a place of their own, had never felt so urgent. The evening settled over Lagos, and the city's endless hum softened to a low murmur. Inside the quiet office building, Sarah and Grace sat on their thin mat in the corner of the corridor. The day's warmth had faded, and a familiar chill crept up from the tiled floor. Grace was diligently working on her math homework, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "Mommy, what is 6 times 4?" she asked, looking up from her notebook. Sarah leaned closer, the light from her phone screen illuminating the page. "It's 24, my love. You're doing so well." She helped Grace with a few more problems, her heart swelling with pride. Her daughter was so smart, so full of potential. She deserved so much more than this. She deserved a desk to do her homework on, a warm room, a proper bed. After they finished, they ate the delicious jollof rice and chicken that David had given her. Grace's eyes lit up as she ate. "This is so yummy, Mommy." "Where did you get it?" "A kind friend gave it to me," Sarah said, not wanting to explain the details. They ate in comfortable silence, the simple meal feeling like a luxury. When they were done, Sarah tucked Grace under the Ankara blanket. "Good night, my angel," she whispered, kissing her forehead. "Good night, Mommy," Grace replied, her eyes already closing. Soon Grace's soft breathing filled the quiet hallway. Sarah, however, couldn't sleep. She sat with her back against the cold wall, her phone in her hand. She wasn't scrolling through social media or watching videos. She was studying. She had found a free online course on project management, and she spent every spare moment she had reading the materials. Her cleaner's job paid the bills, barely, but her sociology degree was her ticket to a better life. She just needed a chance. The hours passed. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional whir of the building's air conditioning. Lost in her studies, Sarah didn't hear the sound of the elevator doors opening at the far end of the hall. David stepped out, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. He had been at a late dinner meeting and had realized he left his second phone on his desk. He walked down the corridor, his mind on the day's work, when he saw something in the dim light. He stopped, his eyes widening in disbelief. There, on the floor, was Sarah. She was asleep now, her head resting on her knees, her phone still glowing in her lap. And next to her, curled up under a colorful cloth, was a small child. It was Grace. He stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Sarah, the quiet, hard-working cleaner who always had a polite smile, was homeless. She and her daughter were sleeping on the floor of his office building. A wave of emotions washed over him. Shock, then sadness, then a deep, aching sense of shame. He lived in a comfortable apartment in a nice part of the city. He never had to worry about where he would sleep at night. And here, just a few feet from his own office, a mother and her child were living in the shadows, with nothing but a thin mat between them and the cold floor. He looked at Grace's peaceful face, and his heart broke. No child should have to live like this. He thought of his own comfortable life, the food he sometimes wasted, the luxuries he took for granted. It all felt so wrong, so unfair. He backed away slowly, not wanting to wake them. He forgot all about his phone. All he could think about was Sarah and Grace. His perception of her had been completely transformed. She wasn't just a cleaner anymore. She was a mother fighting a desperate battle for survival, a woman of incredible strength and resilience. He returned to the elevator, his face a mixture of pity and a new, steely resolve. "This isn't right," he whispered to himself as the doors closed. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not let this continue. He had to do something. He would do something. The decision settled in his heart, firm and unshakable. The next morning, David arrived at the office earlier than usual. The corridor was empty. The mat, the blanket, and the bags were gone, hidden away. It was as if Sarah and Grace had never been there. But David could not forget the image of them sleeping on the cold floor. It had haunted him all night. He knew he had to help, but he also knew he had to be careful. Sarah was a proud woman. He had seen it in her eyes. She would not accept charity easily. He needed a plan, a way to offer help that she could accept without feeling ashamed. When Sarah came to clean his office, he greeted her with his usual warm smile, but his eyes were filled with a new gentleness. "Sarah, could we talk for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. She looked surprised but nodded and sat down, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "I was looking over the company's accounts," David began, choosing his words carefully, "and I realized we have a small welfare fund for employees facing hardship. It's something we don't use very often, but it's there for situations like this." He pushed an envelope across the desk. "I've approved a significant salary advance for you. Please, take it. Consider it a loan from the company, and you can pay it back whenever you're able." Sarah stared at the envelope, then at David, her eyes wide with shock. "Sir, David, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "Just take it. Find a place to stay, even if it's just for a little while." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She couldn't stop them. This was the lifeline she had been praying for. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't know what this means to me." "There's more," David continued, his voice kind. "I happen to have an old apartment in Aja. It's been empty for a while. It's nothing fancy, but it's furnished, and it's clean and safe. I want you and Grace to stay there, rent-free, until you get back on your feet." Sarah was stunned into silence. A salary advance was one thing, but an entire apartment. It was too much. It was more than she could ever have imagined. "I can't accept that," she said, shaking her head. "It's too generous. I can't impose on you like that." "It's not an imposition," David insisted. "The apartment is just sitting there, empty. It would make me happy to know it's being used by someone who needs it. Please, Sarah, do it for Grace. She deserves a proper home." The mention of Grace's name was what finally broke through Sarah's pride. He was right. Her daughter deserved a safe place to live, a real bed to sleep in. She looked at David, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and she knew she had to accept. "Okay," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Okay, we'll stay there, but only for a little while, until I can find a place of our own." A wave of relief washed over David. "Good," he said, his smile returning. "I'll drive you there myself this evening after work." For the first time in months, Sarah felt a true sense of hope. A warm bed, a safe apartment, a kind man who seemed to care about her. Maybe their life was finally about to change. She looked at David, her heart full of a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. It felt like the beginning of something new. But she couldn't help but wonder, could she truly accept such a huge favor from her boss? The question lingered, a small shadow in the bright light of her newfound hope. That evening, David drove Sarah and Grace to the apartment in Ajar. The building was modest, but it was in a quiet, safe neighborhood. As they walked up to the second-floor apartment, Sarah's heart was a nervous drumbeat in her chest. She was still struggling with the idea of accepting so much help, but David's easy, friendly manner made it feel less like charity and more like a friend helping a friend. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Here we are," he said with a smile. Sarah stepped inside and her breath caught. The apartment was simple, but it was clean and bright. There was a comfortable-looking sofa in the living room, a small dining table, and a clean kitchen with a gas cooker and a fridge. It was more than she could have hoped for. Grace, however, had no such reservations. Her eyes went wide with excitement. "Mommy, look, a real house." She ran inside, her small feet pattering on the tiled floor. She explored every corner of the apartment, her happy shouts echoing through the rooms. A bedroom, and a real bed, and a kitchen. "Mommy, can we make soup tonight?" Sarah watched her, tears of joy filling her eyes. Seeing her daughter so happy, so full of life, melted away all of her pride and doubt. This was what mattered. This was why she had to accept David's help. "Yes, my love," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "We can make whatever you want." David brought in their few bags, his presence filling the small apartment with a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. He showed Sarah how to work the stove and where the extra blankets were stored. He treated her with such respect and care as if she were a guest in his home, not just an employee in need. As they were arranging their things, their hands brushed while reaching for the same bag. A jolt, like a tiny spark of electricity, passed between them. Sarah quickly pulled her hand back, her cheeks flushing. She looked up and met David's eyes. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, a mixture of tenderness and something more, something deeper. The moment was broken by Grace, who ran into the room holding a coloring book. "Uncle David, will you color with me?" she asked, her voice bright and hopeful. David's face broke into a wide smile. "I would love to, Grace," he said, and sat down on the floor with her, the two of them immediately lost in a world of crayons and cartoon characters. Sarah watched them, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. For so long, her life had been about survival, about getting through one hard day after another. She had forgotten what it felt like to have a moment of peace, a moment of simple happiness. As she looked at David laughing with her daughter on the floor of their new temporary home, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had given them more than just a place to live, he had given them a chance to breathe again. And as she watched him, she realized that her feelings for him were growing into something more than just gratitude. It was a dangerous feeling, a hopeful feeling. For the first time in a very long time, Sarah felt like she might have a future again. But the spark she felt when their hands touched was both exciting and terrifying. What did it mean? And could she dare to hope for something more? A week passed, and the small apartment in Ajar began to feel like home. Sarah had settled into a new routine. In the mornings, she would make a proper breakfast for Grace in their own kitchen. In the evenings, they would sit at the dining table and do homework together. The simple joys of a normal life felt like a miracle. Sarah's hope for the future was starting to grow. She was still a cleaner at the office, but she felt a new sense of purpose. David's kindness had given her the strength to believe in herself again. Their interactions at work were professional, but there was an unspoken connection between them, a warmth that lingered in their glances and smiles. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune, as she prepared a pot of agouti soup. Grace was in the living room, happily watching cartoons on the small television David had provided. There was a knock on the door. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and went to open it. She expected it to be a neighbor, but instead she saw two stylishly dressed women standing there. One of them, a woman with a bright, confident smile, looked vaguely familiar. "Hello," the woman said, her voice friendly. "Is this David's apartment? My name is Mary, I'm his sister. This is my friend, Bola." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. David's sister. "Oh yes, please come in," she said, stepping aside to let them in. Mary walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the apartment with a critical gaze. "So this is the place. My brother told me he let an employee stay here temporarily. I just wanted to come and inspect it." There was a strange edge to her voice, but Sarah tried to be polite. "Welcome. I'm Sarah." Mary turned to face her, and as she did, her friendly smile froze. Her eyes widened, and all the color drained from her face. She stared at Sarah as if she had seen a ghost. The air in the room suddenly grew thick and cold. Recognition dawned in Mary's eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a look of such deep, old pain that it made Sarah flinch. Sarah looked back at her, confused, and then she remembered. A face from a long time ago, a memory she had tried to bury deep in her past. Mary, Ricky, the woman whose heart she had broken, the woman whose fiancé she had stolen. The confident, smiling woman was gone. In her place was a woman trembling with years of buried anger and hurt. "You," Mary whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. The single word was filled with so much pain and accusation that it felt like a physical blow. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. The hope, the peace, the fragile new life she had started to build, it all came crashing down in that one moment of recognition. The past she had run from for so long had finally caught up with her, and it had found her in the one place she had started to feel safe. Bola looked back and forth between them, her expression confused. Grace, sensing the tension, had gone quiet, her wide eyes fixed on the three women. "What are you doing here?" Mary repeated, her voice rising, shaking with a fury that had been simmering for years. "What are you doing in my brother's house?" Sarah stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Her worst nightmare had just walked through her door. The secret she had kept hidden for so long was about to explode. and she knew it would destroy everything. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with the electricity of a gathering storm. Sarah stood frozen, her mind reeling. Of all the people in the world, why did David's sister have to be Mary, the woman she had wronged so deeply? I work for your brother, Sarah finally managed to say, her voice barely audible. You work for him? Mary's laugh was sharp and bitter, devoid of any humor. So you're cleaning his floors now? How fitting. After you treated my life like dirt, now you get to scrub it for a living. Mary, please, Sarah pleaded, taking a step forward. Let me explain. Explain what? Mary shot back, her eyes blazing with fury. Explain how you destroyed my life, how you took the man I was going to marry. There is nothing to explain. She turned to her friend, Bola. This is the woman I told you about, the one who had an affair with Michael, the one who ruined everything. Bola's eyes widened in shock as she looked at Sarah. I was young, Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. I made a terrible mistake. I have regretted it every day since. A mistake? Mary's voice rose to a near shout. You call that a mistake? Do you have any idea what you did to me? I loved him. We were going to get married. And you just came in and took him. Like he was nothing. Like I was nothing. Her voice broke, and she started to sob. I almost killed myself because of you. Do you know that? I spent weeks in a hospital because I didn't want to live anymore. And you call it a mistake? The raw pain in Mary's voice was like a physical blow. Sarah stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. She had known she hurt Mary, but she had never known the true extent of the damage. Guilt, sharp and overwhelming, washed over her. Just then, the door opened, and David walked in, a cheerful smile on his face. Mary, what a surprise. What are you? His smile faded as he took in the scene. His sister weeping, Sarah looking devastated, and Grace huddled in a corner, looking terrified. What's going on here? He asked, his voice filled with confusion. Mary turned to him, her face streaked with tears. What's going on, David? I'll tell you what's going on. You brought this woman into our lives, the woman who destroyed me. David looked from his sister to Sarah, his confusion deepening. What are you talking about? You two know each other? Know each other? Mary laughed again, a hysterical sound. Oh, we know each other very well. Ask her, David. Ask your precious Sarah what she did to me. David looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. Sarah couldn't meet his gaze. She just stood there, drowning in her shame. She's the reason Michael left me, Mary cried out, her voice raw with pain. She had an affair with my fiancé, and now you've brought her into our home, into our family. David was stunned. He looked at Sarah, then back at his sister. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mary took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at her brother, her eyes filled with a desperate ultimatum. You have to choose, David, she said, her voice trembling but firm. You have to choose right now. Is it going to be her, or is it going to be me? Your family. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. David was trapped, caught in a storm from a past he knew nothing about. His heart was torn between the sister he loved and the woman he was beginning to fall for. The choice seemed impossible, and he knew that whatever he decided, someone's heart would be broken. The weight of Mary's ultimatum pressed down on David, suffocating him. He looked at his sister, her face a mask of grief and betrayal. Then he looked at Sarah, who stood pale and trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to face him. In the corner, little Grace was crying silently, her small body shaking with fear. Mary, calm down, David said, trying to keep his own voice steady. Let's just talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Mary cried, her voice rising with hysteria. I will not have that woman in my life. I will not have her near my family. You need to throw her out, now. I'm not going to throw a mother and her child out on the street, David said firmly, his gaze softening as he looked at Grace. So you're choosing her over me? Mary's voice was a wounded whisper. After everything she did. After everything I've been through. I'm not choosing anyone, David said, his patience wearing thin. I just found out about this 5 seconds ago. I need time to understand what happened. I need time to think. Think about what? She's a snake, David, a homewrecker, and you let her into our lives. Feeling utterly betrayed, Mary turned and stormed toward the door. "Fine. You take your time. But as long as she is here, don't call me. Don't talk to me. You've made your choice." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The apartment felt cold and empty. Sarah was still standing in the same spot, wrapped in a cocoon of shame. Grace ran to her and buried her face in her mother's dress, her small sobs the only sound in the room. David walked over to Sarah, his heart heavy. The joy and hope that had filled this apartment just moments ago had vanished, replaced by the bitter ghosts of the past. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "What she said about you and Michael? Is it true?" Sarah couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face. The shame was a physical weight, crushing her. She had hoped to leave her past behind, to build a new life for herself and Grace. But the past had a long reach, and now it had poisoned everything. David looked at her, at the genuine remorse etched on her face, and at the terrified child clinging to her legs. He didn't feel anger, only a profound sadness. He had seen a glimpse of the woman Sarah was, strong, kind, and resilient. But this secret, this old wound, was a shadow that threatened to swallow her whole. He knew he couldn't abandon her, not now, not when she was at her most vulnerable. But he also knew that his sister's pain was real and deep. He was caught in an impossible situation, torn between two women he cared about. He knelt so he was at eye level with Grace. "Hey," he said softly, "it's going to be okay." He gave her a small, reassuring smile, but the little girl just cried harder. He stood up and looked at Sarah, the woman who had brought so much light into his life in such a short time, and who now stood at the center of a storm of his family's making. He had asked her to stay, to face this with him. But now, looking at the devastation in her eyes, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. How could they possibly have a future when their very foundation was built on so much pain? The question hung between them, unanswered and heavy with the weight of what was to come. Later that evening, after Grace had cried herself to sleep in the small bedroom, Sarah sat on the sofa in the dimly lit living room. David sat across from her, a heavy silence hanging between them. The apartment, which had so recently felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage filled with unspoken words and painful memories. "Tell me everything," David said again, his voice soft but insistent. "I need to understand." Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth, but she knew she owed him the truth. She couldn't hide any more. "It happened almost 8 years ago," she began, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "I had just finished university. I was young and naive. I met Michael through a mutual friend. I didn't know he was engaged. I didn't know about Mary." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "He was charming. He told me he loved me. He made me feel special. He said he was in a relationship he couldn't get out of, but that he wanted to be with me. I was so foolish. I believed him." Her voice cracked, and she paused to compose herself. "We had an affair. It was wrong. I know that now. But at the time, I thought I was in love. When I found out about Mary, I tried to end it. I really did. But he was very persuasive. He manipulated me. He made me believe that she was the one holding him back, that we were meant to be together." Tears streamed down her face as she relived the worst mistake of her life. "Then I got pregnant, and everything changed. The moment I told him, he disappeared. He stopped answering my calls, he moved out of his apartment, he just vanished. That's when I realized that everything he had told me was a lie. He had never loved me. He had just used me." She finally looked up at David, her eyes filled with a deep, soul-crushing guilt. "I tried to find Mary. I wanted to apologize. But she had moved, and no one would tell me where she was. I heard rumors about what had happened, that she was in a bad way. The guilt. It has been eating me alive for years. I never wanted to hurt her. I was just a stupid girl who made a terrible, terrible mistake." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I understand if you want me to leave. I will go. I don't want to cause any more pain for you or your family. You've been so kind to me, and I've brought nothing but trouble to your door." David listened to her story, his expression unreadable. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, the years of pain she had carried alone. He saw not a cold, calculating homewrecker, but a young woman who had been used and abandoned, a woman who had been paying for her mistake every single day since. His heart went out to her. The pity he had felt for the homeless cleaner had transformed into something deeper, a profound empathy for the woman sitting before him, bearing her soul. He saw her strength, her resilience, and the fierce love she had for her daughter, the child born from that painful past. He got up from his chair and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he gently took her hand. Her skin was cold and her hand was trembling in his. "Don't go," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not going anywhere." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You made a mistake, Sarah," he said, "a bad one. But you were young and you were manipulated. You don't have to keep paying for it for the rest of your life. We'll face this together." His words were a balm on her wounded soul. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in her guilt. But as she looked into his kind, determined eyes, a new fear crept into her heart. How could they possibly be together? Mary's hatred for her was a wall between them, a wall that seemed impossible to tear down. His promise to face it together was a beautiful dream, but Sarah feared it was a dream that would be shattered by the harsh reality of his sister's unforgiving heart. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over the apartment. David and Sarah moved forward with their relationship, but the shadow of Mary's anger loomed over them. David tried to call his sister several times, but she never picked up. He sent her long text messages, trying to explain, trying to get her to understand, but she never replied. It was as if she had erased him from her life. At work, things were also tense. Mr. Adebayo seemed to have sensed the shift in the office dynamics. He watched Sarah with suspicion, his eyes cold and judgmental. He found new ways to make her life difficult, assigning her the hardest cleaning tasks and criticizing her work for no reason. Sarah tried to ignore him, focusing on her job and the quiet moments she shared with David. He would often find reasons to talk to her, asking about Grace or sharing a funny story. These small interactions were like pockets of sunshine in her otherwise stressful day. One afternoon, David called Sarah into his office. He had a serious but kind expression on his face. "Sarah," he began, "I've been looking at your file. You have a degree in sociology. You are far too qualified to be a cleaner." Sarah looked down, unsure of what to say. "I've spoken with HR," David continued. "There's an opening for an administrative assistant in the marketing department. The pay is much better, and it's a chance for you to use your skills. I want you to have the job." Sarah was stunned. A promotion. A real office job. It was everything she had been dreaming of, everything she had been studying for in the dim light of the corridor. "But I'm just a cleaner," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "You are much more than that," David said firmly. "You are intelligent and hard-working. You deserve this. The job is yours if you want it." Tears of gratitude filled Sarah's eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, I want it. Thank you, David. Thank you." The next week, Sarah started her new job. She traded her blue cleaner's uniform for a simple but professional dress. She sat at her own desk with her own computer. It felt like a dream. She worked harder than ever, determined to prove that David's faith in her was not misplaced. Her new position, however, did not go unnoticed. Mr. Adebayo watched her with barely concealed contempt. And one afternoon, the dream turned into a nightmare. Mary stormed into the office. She ignored the receptionist and marched straight to the marketing department, her face a mask of cold fury. She stopped in front of Sarah's desk, her eyes blazing. "So, this is your new life," Mary said, her voice loud enough for the entire office to hear. "My brother promotes his mistress to a fancy new job. How sweet." The office went silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared. Sarah's face turned pale. She felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Mary, please," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't do this here." "Don't do what? Tell the truth?" Mary's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I think everyone here deserves to know what kind of person you are. A homewrecker. A cheap opportunist who sleeps with her boss to get ahead." The words were like slaps to the face. Sarah felt the eyes of her colleagues on her, their expressions a mixture of shock and curiosity. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The humiliation was unbearable. She had been given a chance at a new life, a chance to be respected, and now Mary was tearing it all down in front of everyone. The public humiliation was a wound that festered. Sarah tried to go about her work, but the whispers and stares of her colleagues followed her everywhere. The office, which had once been a place of hope, now felt like a prison of judgment. She felt isolated and ashamed, the scarlet letter of Mary's accusations branded on her. David was furious when he found out what had happened. He confronted Mary that evening, their argument echoing through his own large, empty house. "How could you do that, Mary?" he yelled, his voice raw with anger. "How could you humiliate her like that in front of everyone?" "She deserved it," Mary screamed back, her face streaked with tears. "She deserved so much worse. She is ruining everything, David. Can't you see that?" "She is not ruining anything. You are the one who is so consumed by hate that you can't see straight." "Hate? You want to talk about hate? She took my future from me, and now you are giving her everything she wants, a job, a house, my own brother. I will not stand for it." Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "This is it, David. This is your final chance. You get rid of her. You fire her, you kick her out of that apartment, and you never see her again. If you don't, I swear, I will tell everyone in our family what is going on. I will tell our business partners. I will create a scandal so big that it will ruin you. I will disown you as my brother. I will never speak to you again." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. David stared at his sister, his heart breaking. He loved her, but he couldn't stand the person she had become, so twisted by bitterness and a thirst for revenge. Back at the apartment, Sarah had overheard the shouting through the thin walls of her own home. She couldn't make out all the words, but she heard the anger, the pain, and the unmistakable sound of a family being torn apart. And she knew she was the cause. She couldn't do it. She couldn't be the reason David lost his sister. He had already done so much for her. He had given her a home, a job, and a glimpse of happiness she thought she would never have again. She couldn't repay his kindness by destroying his family. With a heavy heart, she made a decision. It was the hardest decision of her life, but she knew it was the right one. While David was out at a late business meeting the next day, Sarah quietly packed their few belongings. She folded the clothes, packed the school books, and placed Grace's favorite teddy bear on top. She looked around the small apartment that had been their sanctuary, her heart aching with a sense of loss so profound it felt like a physical pain. She sat down at the dining table and wrote a short note to David. Her hands trembled as she wrote, and tears stained the paper. "Dear David, thank you for everything. You gave me hope when I had none, but I cannot be the reason you lose your sister. She needs you. Please forgive me. Don't look for us. We will be okay. Goodbye, Sarah." She placed the note on the table, took Grace's hand and walked out of the apartment, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't know where they would go. She didn't know what they would do. All she knew was that she had to disappear from David's life for his own good. Later that night, David returned home, tired but hopeful. He had decided to stand by Sarah to weather the storm with her. He walked into the apartment, calling her name. "Sarah, I'm home." The apartment was silent, too silent. A sense of dread crept into his heart. He walked into the living room and saw it. The note sitting on the dining table like a white flag of surrender. His hands shook as he picked it up and read it. The words blurred through his tears. She was gone. She had left him. The emptiness of the apartment echoed the emptiness in his heart. He had lost her, and he didn't know if he would ever find her again. The note felt like a block of ice in David's hand. Sarah was gone. She had taken Grace and disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their brief happiness and the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. For a long moment, David just stood there, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him. He felt a desperate, hollow ache in his chest. He had let her down. He had failed to protect her. He knew he couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't let his sister's bitterness win. With a new sense of purpose, he drove to Mary's house. He found her sitting alone in her lavish living room, a glass of wine in her hand, her face hard and unforgiving. "She's gone," David said, his voice flat and empty. "Are you happy now?" Mary looked away, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "It's for the best." "The best for who, Mary?" David's voice rose, filled with a pain he could no longer contain. "The best for you. Because it's not the best for me. I love her, Mary. I love her and I love her daughter. And you drove them away." He sat down across from her, his shoulders slumped. "I know she hurt you. I know what she did was terrible. But that was years ago. She was a child, manipulated by a man who used you both. And she has been paying for that mistake ever since. Can't you see that? Can't you see the pain she's in?" He leaned forward, his eyes pleading with hers. "I went to find them, Mary. I found them sleeping in the corridor of my office building. Her little girl, Grace, doing her homework on the cold floor. Is that the justice you want, for an innocent child to suffer because of a mistake her mother made before she was even born?" He told her everything. He told her about Sarah's struggle, her resilience, her quiet dignity. He told her about Grace's sadness at school and the joy on her face when she saw the apartment. He laid his heart bare, showing his sister the depth of his love for Sarah and the pain he felt at losing her. "This hatred you're holding on to," he said, his voice soft now, "it's not just hurting her. It's hurting you. It's making you a bitter, unhappy person, and it's destroying us. I don't want to lose you, Mary. But I can't live in a world filled with this much anger. Please, let it go. Forgive her. For my sake, if not for yours." Tears streamed down Mary's face as she listened. His words, filled with so much love and pain, finally broke through the wall of anger she had built around her heart. She saw the truth in what he was saying. Her quest for revenge had brought nothing but more misery. I'm sorry, David," she sobbed. "I was so wrong." David knew exactly where to find Sarah. He drove back to the office building, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. And there they were, huddled in the same corner, on the same thin mat. Grace was asleep, and Sarah was watching over her, her face a mask of despair. "Sarah," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes widening in shock. "Come home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, come home." He brought them back to the apartment. Mary was waiting for them. She looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with a mixture of old pain and new understanding. "I'm sorry," Mary said, her voice barely a whisper, "for everything. I was wrong to hold on to so much hate. Can you forgive me?" Sarah, speechless, could only nod as tears of relief streamed down her face. The two women, bound by a shared, painful past, finally found their way to forgiveness. The story doesn't end there, with a perfect fairy tale ending. The path ahead was complicated. There were scars that would take time to heal, and a family that needed to be rebuilt from the broken pieces of the past. But it was a beginning. A few evenings later, the four of them sat around the dining table, sharing a simple meal of rice and stew. David and Sarah sat side by side, their hands intertwined under the table. Across from them, Mary was showing Grace a funny video on her phone, and Grace's bright, happy laughter filled the room. It was not a perfect family. It was a family forged in the fires of betrayal, struggle, and pain. But it was also a family built on the foundation of something much stronger. Forgiveness, empathy, and a love that was brave enough to give second chances. As David looked at the faces around the table, the woman he loved, the child he had come to adore, and the sister he had almost lost, he knew he was home. It wasn't the easy, uncomplicated life he had once known. It was something much better. It was real. And it was filled with hope.